Hey guys, I recognize this video is very long. If you want to just go straight to the facts and the information that I'm pumping out in this video, go to the timestamp right here.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is Eric, your California driver. Today I have a really interesting topic I want to cover. This is a study that just published today by The Verge. So this is going to be a, we'll say groundbreaking video. I don't think anyone's actually made a video on this topic just yet. But before we get there, I want to reward a few of my subscribers who commented on my last video in regards to your rate cards in your particular areas. There were 8 people that actually, I had plenty of other comments, but there were 8 who actually, submitted their rate cards in the comment section. And I am giving away 2 pairs of state flag socks. Really, it's like a 1 in 4 chance that you're gonna win. So pretty good. I would have hoped that there would have been more participation just so we can kind of create some more transparency in the rideshare community for what's going on throughout the country. But without further ado, let us award some people. Okay, so the first winner is Ride Upstate from Albany, New York. Thank you so much. Go ahead and email me. My email's in the description. And the second winner is the Killicam 818 from Simi Valley, California. Go ahead and email me. My email's in the description. I will send them wherever you would like. I can give you whatever pair of state flag socks you'd like and send it whatever address you'd like. Just go ahead and email me. Thanks guys so much. Now let's get into the video. Okay, so today this video is going to be exclusively on Uber tipping, why riders don't tip, and how we can increase that number. So first we want to go over this study. So The Verge released an article in regards to a study by Enber, has no relation to Uber. The highlights of this article are this. Before, if you just want the baseline, just the bare bones, what is this article about? Interestingly, even though tips are made privately and without external social benefits or pressure, more than 15% of rideshare trips are tipped, yet nearly 60% of people never tip and only 1% of people always tip. Let that be kind of the foundation of what we're going to talk about, which leaves a very large window of people that we can influence to tip us on a ride. Obviously, right off the bat, you'll find out that 6 out of 10 people just will not tip regardless of what you do. And I find that to be overwhelmingly true. But I feel like I do receive tips on more than 15% of my rides. Now, I wish I were actually taking some month-over-month statistics to back this up. I just feel like I do get tipped on more than 1 out of 6 rides. Let's say that I didn't. Let's say that I just get tipped the average. What are we doing wrong? If we know that 40% of people sometimes tip and only 1% of people always tip, that means there is a window of 39% of people, roughly 4 out of 10 people that get into your car might tip you or they might not, based on their experience. And what can we do to influence that? So I just want to read in its entirety this Verge article with you, and then I want to go over some of my thoughts. Okay, the article starts off, nearly 2/3 of Uber customers don't tip their drivers, studies say. Only 1% of Uber customers always tip, while nearly 60% never do, according to a new study from the National Bureau of Economic Research, Enber. The average tip is 50 cents a ride, but for those who do tip, the average is more like $3. Men are more likely to tip than women, but female drivers get tipped more than male ones. Tipping has long been a source of fierce debate, especially as it relates to ride-hauling companies like Uber. For years, the company rejected efforts to add a tipping option to its app, arguing it would overcomplicate the seamlessness of the experience. But Uber eventually caved, and now drivers earn hundreds of millions of dollars in tips per year. The Enber study on tipping with Uber is sure to throw more fuel on the fire. The paper was authored by Stanford University's Bharat Chander and University of California, San Diego's Yuri Nizi, as well as John List, the former chief economist at Uber, who is now at Lyft, and Ian Muir, current head of economics at Lyft. The researchers were uniquely positioned. In addition to combining big data analyzation with field experimentation, the team actually helped Uber implement its in-app tipping option, which rolled out in June 2017. As such, they were able to develop data from more than 40 million trips. What they found was not a whole lot of tipping. Roughly 16% of Uber rides are tipped, yet most riders, 60%, never tipped over the research team's 4 weeks of data collection. Of those who do tip, very few, 1% tip on every trip. The remainder of people only tip on about 25% of trips. And if you get a chance, go ahead and watch this video right here. It's very insightful as you know, it relates to what riders think about the whole tipping experience. This is likely because of the unique aspects of app-based ride hauling. All payments take place in the app and riders simply hop out of the vehicle when the ride is over. It's only after the fact, sometimes long after the fact, depending on when you open the Uber app next, when riders are asked whether they want to tip. As such, the question of tipping is removed from the experience of the ride, Neezy explained. I think Uber drivers are tipped less than taxi drivers because tipping happens after the ride is over and not face-to-face, Neezy said in an email. In a sense, I think that this is the right way. Riders don't tip automatically, but only if they are happy with the service. Hence, tips provide incentives to drivers. In an email, Chandar cautioned that the data was from 2017 and could be considered stale. That said, he didn't believe that Uber should be seeking to encourage people to tip more. It is not obvious to me that getting people to tip more or on rideshare or otherwise should be the goal, Chandar said. As we show in the paper, while tipping has some relationship with trip quality, it is also associated with other factors not evidently related to quality. Effects on earnings can also be ambiguous, as we show in our other paper released today. There were other interesting findings, such as riders who have a 5-star rating tip more than twice as often as those with a 4.75 rating, and when they do tip, they do it nearly 14% more. The team also noticed important correlations between gender and tipping. Male riders tip 23% more than female riders, a result largely driven by the fact that men are more likely to tip than women, approximately 19% more often. Further, female drivers are tipped more than male drivers, a fact that is true regardless of ride gender. Men tip female drivers nearly 11% more than they tip male drivers. Uber has a fraught history with tipping. It was reportedly Travis Kalanick, the former CEO and co-founder of Uber, that most fiercely rejected calls to add tipping, and it was only when Kalanick was about to be ousted from his job during Uber's scandal-plagued 2017 that the company eventually caved and added the option. See, dude. Moreover, Uber sought to undermine the very notion of tipping. Uber published a post on Medium in April 2016 that went into greater detail about the company's position on tipping. Whether consciously or unconsciously, we tend to tip certain types of people better than others, Uber said. This means two people providing the same level of service get paid different amounts. With Uber, drivers know that they earn the same for doing the same trip, no matter who they are or where they're from. The company cited a 2008 Cornell University study that found that consumers of both races discriminate against black service providers by tipping them less than white service providers. But it's worth noting that the study predated the gig economy by several years. And now Uber has trained customers to leave their cash at home, and that ratings, not dollars, translate into better service. Uber has recently changed its tune on tipping. A year after making in-app tipping possible, the company touted the fact that drivers had earned more than $600 million in tips in the US and Canada. The number has risen considerably since then, according to a spokesman. In the past 2 years, Uber drivers and Uber Eats couriers have collected nearly $2 billion in tips. So we're committed to developing and improving features that help detect and mitigate bias on our platform, a spokesman said. So there is so much to unpack here, and we will do so. First and foremost, I definitely agree with the part of the study that says that women get tipped more than men. My wife, when she drives, she consistently makes more in tips than I do. Now, I feel that I am a little bit better at navigating the rideshare landscape because I'm a little bit more experienced. She only has a couple hundred rides under her belt, as you know, opposed to me, I have almost 2,000. I feel like we make roughly the same amount, but she does seem to get tipped more heavily and also consistently more than I do. I'm not sure if this should be troubling, that I feel that it's sexist that I don't get tipped as much. I think, throughout the course of human history, men have made more money, and thus it would only make sense that it's kind of like ingrained in the male psyche that we should be tipping because we have more disposable income than women do. Is it right? I don't think so. I don't think it's right that men have been paid differently for, if they are doing the same job at the same skill rate, that should be getting paid the same. But I think spending habits are a very difficult thing to really put a finger on as to why men in 2019 would tip more, not only more frequently, but in greater abundance than women. I don't know the answer to that. I will, however, vehemently oppose the idea that tipping is racist. I just think that's absolutely not true. First off, they weren't taking into account all races. They were taking into account blacks versus whites. And I think that's just, it's very targeted. It's, studies like that are made with one goal in mind, that's to further divide people in the country. So they weren't saying, Asians or Hispanics or Middle Eastern people or Native Americans or any other race, blacks versus whites, which do not, especially if you've taken a lot of rideshare trips, that doesn't really appropriately convey the landscape of the rideshare community. Is not 50% white and 50% black. That's just not it. It's very diverse in terms of its landscape. In Los Angeles, especially if you're anywhere in the city, it's not a white versus black thing. I don't think it ever has been and never will be. And I don't think that that my race has caused me to get more or less tips. And I'm one of the 1% that tips my driver every single time. I tend to tip roughly about the same amount, usually like the lowest amount that it offers me. Typically I'm taking short trips. And so I just, it'd be $1 or $2 on a $6 trip. So I don't know if I'm special. I just know what it's like to be on the other side of the coin and not get tipped, and I wish I got tipped more. And so I always remember my drivers. I don't care what they look like. I don't care what gender they are. I just think that we're all part of a community and we deserve to get tipped. So what we want to talk about is how come we don't get, if there are 60% of people that are never going to tip. I mean, I'm not the best at math, but I know 100 minus 60 is 40 and 40 minus 1 is 39. So I feel like there's 39% of people that tip between rarely to regularly, but not always and not never. And so those are the people that we should be focusing on. What are we doing wrong that if we're only getting tipped 15% of the time, but yet there are 39% of people that tip sometimes, how come we're not getting them more often? That we can move the needle a little bit. So I want to play this second video. Is by Simon Sinek. I hope I didn't butcher his last name. You may have seen some of his other videos, and it's just about the narrative that we project for ourselves.
So I wanted to prove that all marketing was the same thing. No matter what you were selling, it was always the same thing, right? And good marketing talked about the buyer, and bad marketing talked about the seller. Make sense? I versus you, right? So to illustrate my point, I wanted to prove that what the homeless do and what Microsoft does is the same thing. So if you think about what the homeless do, there is advertising. They sit there with a little sign that says, I'm homeless, I'm hungry, I got 6 kids, I'm a veteran, like whatever, trying to appeal to everybody. That's called a little billboard, right? Microsoft has a billboard that says more memory, bigger screen, all the rest of it, right? More RAM, more ROM, right? And what the homeless are selling is goodwill. So if you walk past a homeless person and you put money in their cup, you feel good. If you give them nothing, you either feel nothing or feel bad. You paid for that feeling. There's an exchange of consideration. I sold you goodwill, you paid for it, you got it, right? They're selling goodwill. That's what they're doing. They're selling the feeling of goodwill. So I found a homeless person who was willing to help me, and her sign was pretty typical, and I found out that she makes between $20 and $30 a day selling goodwill, and she works an 8 to 10 hour day, right? $30 is considered a good day, right? Selling goodwill. And like I said, her sign was pretty typical. So I asked her if I could change her sign, and we did. And the sign that I gave her, she made $40 in 2 hours. The sign that I gave her said, if you only give once a month, please think of me next time. It wasn't about the seller, it was about the giver. What are the reasons people say they don't give? How do I know that they're genuine? I can't give to everyone. So I simply answered the questions. If you only give once a month, please think of me next time. I know you can't give to everybody. I'm legit. That's all. Right? Now here's the point I was going to make. She could have made $150 that day. But after she made her $40 in 2 hours, she left. Because one of the reasons she's homeless, or we could surmise that one of the reasons she's homeless is she's decided that she needs $20 or $30 to live per day. So once she had it, she moved on. That's a narrative. It's a narrative. Right? So she'll stay there because she didn't sit longer. It's a narrative. So there's a wonderful little trick you can use with your narrative. Right? Just add the word yet at the end. Okay? I'm not famous yet.
That's a pretty deep video. That's actually really, that's a really inspiring video, really deep, not just in terms of trying to get more tips, but just like the narrative that we have for ourselves and what pushes us and what our goals are and how our goals reflect how much effort we put in, right? If my goal is to make between my job and my stock company and Uber, if my goal is to make $1,000 a week as opposed to $500 a week, does it push me a lot more to achieve those things that I want in life? And I think in a lot of ways, yes, our narrative changes once we realize I need more money to live a certain quality of life that I'm looking for. The less we are willing to settle for, the less effort we're going to put in, and the more complacent I think we'll become. That being said, this is not about that. This is not a motivational video, but more how we can change our narrative to influence more people to tip. I thought about this a lot, and I've thought, are there things that I'm doing that are not allowing me? In his video, he says that homeless people are selling goodwill. And a lot of times I think tipping is a lot like that. We tip as a bit of goodwill. Usually when we tip, it's after we've, especially on the rideshare platform, they're tipping after they've seen you, right? So they're already gone, they'll never see you again. They're making a decision to tip you or not. And that's probably why you get tipped a lot less frequently than taxi drivers do per se, because it's very difficult to look someone in the face and not tip them when it's in an industry that kind of has an expectation that there are tips attached. But it's much easier when you've already paid for the ride on the platform, you get out of the car, bid adieu, and I'll never see that person and they'll never be able to get upset at me for not tipping them. And especially if you're a driver, you can only leave a rating within that until you click off and go to the next person. So you're either gonna leave them a 5 or not, and it's not gonna have anything to do with whether if they're gonna tip you or not, right? If someone says, oh, I'll tip you on the app, yeah, well, I'll probably be more likely to give that person a 5, but I very rarely give someone less anyways. But I find it interesting that this study was saying that riders that have a rating of 5 or tip more often and more in greater amounts than those that are 4.75, which I think is just really interesting. I don't know what it says about what we can deduce from a rider's rating before we pick them up, but here's what I do know. People that only occasionally ride Uber are more likely to be interactive with the driver. For example, someone going to and from the airport who has their own car that just is going so they don't have to pay for parking, or someone that has a car and is going through car trouble. Those people are more likely to receive a 5 rating because they only ride seldomly and they have a good experience with the driver, and they're more likely to tip because they only ride seldomly. Whereas someone that rides frequently, like every single day, and takes a pool or a lift line ride is probably not likely to tip because they're taking a trip to and from work every single day, 5 days a week. And you just add up the tips, and if you're just a normal person like me, I could see why a person like that would be more likely to throw in their headphones. If you're taking 10 trips a week, you're probably more likely to throw in your headphones and not really pay attention to the driver, and more likely to not have an overwhelmingly great experience, or just get used to not worrying about the experience and just not tipping regardless of the experience. So what we need to do is find out how we can, independent of race, age, or gender, grab some of this 39% of people that rarely to often tip but not always tip, and how we can get them to always tip in our ride, or be more likely to tip in our ride. 3 things that I think would be great things to do to improve your narrative, to improve what you expect out of the trip. I think if we have this narrative that people don't tip and they're not going to tip, and 60% of the time you're right, you're going to be less likely to provide a positive and above and beyond experience for them. There is a phrase that I was taught in business is under promise and over deliver, right? Under promise, over deliver. These are words that you should live by regardless of what you do. Under promise, over deliver. Uber has already done that for you, right? When people take an Uber or Lyft ride, they're not expecting much most of the time. The rider is already being under promised an experience that you are probably going to give them. If you're like me, you try to interact with the passenger as much as you can if they look open to interacting, right? And I found it to be overwhelmingly true. The passengers that I do not interact with are so unlikely to tip. It's not even funny. I would say it's even less than 15%. If I don't have a conversation with the rider, the odds of them tipping are probably like 5%. So if you have a passenger who gets in your car and immediately puts in headphones in, or it's just on your phone, and here's what I do every ride. We'll just role play like it's a real ride. Uber for Sarah? Okay, sweet. It's nice to meet you. How's your day going? Awesome. So let's stop right there. If you stop right there with your passenger, if that's all you do, you greet them, they get in the back, they had a nice cordial experience with me, and then they just go into texting or scrolling Instagram or throwing their headphones, the odds of me getting tipped, regardless of the fact that I have waters and Starburst in my car and then my car's clean, I have leather seats, the odds of me getting tipped are still about 0. Why? Because there's really not anything. All they're doing is going from point A to point B. They're gonna sit in their seat the same as they would do in anyone's car. And there's really not a lot that sets me apart other than I was kind of nice when I met them. What sets me apart, the things that I do that change my narrative that I can get more than 15% of people to tip me, is that I try to engage and I try to become a friend to them. So I've done door-to-door sales. We call it direct sales, but it's door-to-door sales. I sold for a company called Vivint, which is a home automation company, right? And the most important thing they teach you when you're in your training is not to make a sale on the doorstep or don't drop price on the doorstep, right? Because it's a lot easier to say no to a stranger than it is to say no to a friend. So my job was to just develop a friendship with them. And the goal is to get in the home. Once I get in somebody's home, it's not like I'm doing, sleazy sales tactics, but once I'm in their home, they're more likely to hear what I have to say. I become a stranger, I go from a stranger to a friend. Right? Pretty simple, right? So you got to think about that the same way. When somebody's in your car, that's your opportunity to develop a friendship, because it's way easier to be rude or standoffish to a stranger than it is to someone who's taken the time to get to know you. So I typically like to ask questions like, are you, I live in Los Angeles, very transient city. I just ask them, you born and raised here? There are certain parts of town that you just kind of know that most people in the area are born and raised here. I just tell them straight off the bat that I'm not, and I've only been here for a little over 2 years. It's still a bit overwhelming to me. And I, talk to them about their experience in the city, if they would ever move from the city, things that keep them here, especially if they're an adult. And we just kind of go into, their fears and their aspirations and things like that. My goal is to talk about myself the least amount possible. The more I can get someone else to talk about themselves, the more likely they're going to think that they had a great experience and a great conversation with me. It's interesting how that works, right? That people like to talk about themselves more than they like to listen to someone else talk about themselves, right? The shorter I can make this video, the more likely you're going to enjoy this video, because it's going to give you more time to think about you and your situation than it is going to be think about me and my situation. That's just human nature. That's why in the English language, everyone's favorite word, the thing that releases the most amount of endorphins, is hearing your own name. Isn't that interesting? I also try to incorporate that when I'm talking to someone. I'll try to use their name in conversation. I have it on the app, right? I know their name already. They know my name. Now, sometimes, it's not often, but often enough, you'll get a rider who is not the person on your app. So let's say, it's an Uber ride for Sarah, but it's a middle-aged guy in his 40s who doesn't look like a Sarah. And so sometimes I'll make a joke, like, you don't quite look like a Sarah, but hop on in, because obviously it's on his phone that his, maybe Sarah is his wife or his girlfriend or his sister, or who knows what, ordered the Uber for him, I'll make a joke with him, hop on in, and we go from there, and I try to get his name and use it in conversation. This is no-brainer stuff. This is not rocket science, but it builds relationships of trust when you use someone's name. I don't know why, it just does. And it does the same for me. When people remember my name, it makes me feel good. It makes me feel good to hear my name. I don't know. That's just how the human brain is wired, and science shows that's what releases, of all the words somebody can use, your name is what releases the most amount of endorphins for you. Interesting, right? So those are two things. Strike up a conversation, develop a friendship, use their name. Those are two big ones that you can do to change the narrative. Now, number 3 is something that I'm going to implement as of today. So here's a screenshot of my profile. And as a rider, I tend to look at drivers' profiles, maybe because I do drive, and I'll open it up and I'll see like, oh, he's done like X number of trips and whatever. Kind of along the lines of what Simon Sinek said, that you can change the narrative of who you are and what you want to be, right? And rather than talking about me and what makes me me, I want to point towards you and what it can do for you. And so if you only tip occasionally, think of me this trip. So it's something that I'm going to implement in my rider profile. Maybe it helps, maybe it doesn't, but it can't hurt. That's for sure. It cannot hurt. It's difficult for me as a person to sell goodwill, because when I drive, I tend to have my Prius is a top of the line. It's a 2012. People don't necessarily know. That's the top of the specs of it are top of the line. Leather seats, heated seats. I got amenities and such. I try to dress nice and be groomed well. It's tough for me to sell goodwill that I'm in need more than maybe another driver. Would I be more likely to tip a driver that's an immigrant from a third world country that's really trying to hustle? Would I be more likely to tip him more than I would somebody that looks like me that's lived in a first world country his whole life? Maybe so, but I'm not going to let that deter me from the things that I can do, because I'm not going to dress like a slob. I'm not going to pretend that this is my first rodeo, or that I'm being forced to do this is the only job I can get. That's a terrible narrative for yourself, right? What I can do for myself is develop the narrative that I am in control of what people think of me, and if I can provide an above and beyond experience for them, they're more likely to reach into their pocket, and digital pocket, and throw me a few bones. If you extrapolate that over the course of a day, that can increase your dollars per hour from 18 to 20 to 23 to 25, and over the course of a week, that makes a huge difference. Over the course of a month or a year, we're talking thousands and thousands of dollars just by changing your habits and influencing people. Now, going back to the sign mentality, I currently don't have any signs in my car, right? I don't have any signs in my car, but I've seen ones, and here's a screenshot of one right here, where people will say, your tips pay my gas, right? If you go back to what Simon Sinek said about, taking what do the tips do for the person? You're selling, a product, you're marketing in some way. And that is a very, very selfish way of looking at it. And it doesn't point to the rider, the consumer, and say, how does this benefit me? Like, I'm paying his gas. What am I getting out of it? So you need to look at it the same way that, he taught the homeless person to sell goodwill. I think you need to do the same thing for yourself. If you are going to display a sign in your car, and I'm not opposed to that, I just think that it's something I haven't incorporated before. Try to have the sign or whatever message you're trying to do to increase your tips. I'm not saying to copy exactly what he said, but off the top of my head, the best thing that I could come up with was something similar to what he said. If you only tip occasionally, think of me this trip. What have you done to increase your tips? I would love to hear your answers in the comments, or even if you're critical of the tipping system, what have you seen since Uber implemented a tipping option, and how has it affected your earnings? And what have you had to do to kind of change how you navigate, no pun intended, through the rideshare landscape? So guys, I hope you liked this video. If you did, give it a huge thumbs up. If you loved it, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, God bless you. Have a great day.